Today's video is about our tier list for patch 10.3. We're gonna go over every single role and one champion from each category so you guys get a good feeling about who's strong and who isn't. So make sure you smash that like button, destroy the sub button, and let's jump right in. First things first, how are we organizing the tier list? We heard your feedback from last time, and we're switching things up a little bit. Instead of doing two separate ones, we're just gonna do one tier list, and we're gonna organize champions so that the further you go down a specific tier, the more difficult they become. This way, there's at least just a little bit of leeway for us to move things around and make it reasonable for everybody. With that out of the way, let's jump right into the mid lane. Our feature here from the broken tier is Diana. Diana received some very small nerfs. She got an adjustment to her mana, and her W does 12 less damage. Yeah, not really much of a nerf. Considering that she was the third highest win rate mid laner and the third highest pick rate mid laner, you shouldn't expect to see anything different this time around. With Diana as our broken tier highlight though, you gotta think about what's gonna be strong against her and the other AP assassin who's broken right now, Fizz. In response to that, Kassadin is still a very strong champion, and he is our S tier highlight. Kassadin scales so incredibly well and has a ton of tools to deal with high magic damage opponents. From passive magic resistance to magic resist shields and high mobility, he's got everything that you could need. So he's just a natural pick when champions like Diana and Fizz are strong. On top of that, Ekko, Vladimir, and Katarina are some of the other mid laners who are very strong right now, so it's no surprise that somebody who's so anti-AP assassin is strong. It's important to remember that Kassadin is basically a ticking time bomb. Once a Kassadin hits level 16, the enemy's team's job just becomes so much more difficult. His mobility is insane and his damage skyrockets. But that's why you'll see that a lot of the champions in the A tier have pretty reliable CC. Most of the very top tier mid laners are assassin types right now, and that's why champions who have good CC can excel against them, because if you manage to control them and not allow them to do their burst damage, then they're not gonna have a good time. Our highlight here is actually Pantheon. Pantheon's a bit of a sleeper pick. A lot of people don't realize how powerful he really is. With the ability that he has on his E, being able to ignore all damage coming from a certain direction, he is naturally good against all of the strong assassins, and the people who are weak early on in lane are easily abused by his strong early laning presence. Seriously, if you see an AP assassin pick mid lane, or even an AD assassin, you might want to try picking Pantheon into it. He's relatively simple and not that difficult to play, and once you get the hang of him, you'll be doing just fine. As we slide on into the B tier, you'll notice that there's a couple champions who do have CC, and some of them also do have damage, but the problem with the champions in B tier is that they're just either unreliable or immobile. This naturally makes them weak towards the top tier assassins, and they don't quite make the cut of the other tiers because they just don't have the tools to deal with those champions who are a bit above them right now. Our highlight for the B tier is Zoe. She does a lot of damage and has decent CC. Her problem is that she's relatively immobile unless she has summoner spells to use or manages to pick up items and summoner spells from her enemies. Because this is a conditional situation, it makes it tough for her to be reliable and even harder to play. But just like the rest of the champions in B tier, if you've got the mechanics to make up for it, these champions will do just fine. Taking a step down into C tier, you might see some champions who have similar weaknesses. The weaknesses here are basically just exaggerated ones of those in the B tier. You're looking at champions who are really inconsistent like Ziggs, or champions who have a rough time dealing with a lot of meta picks right now like Cho'Gath or Karma. But our highlight here is Galio. Galio actually recently got buffs and he might have some potential. It's hard to say how much it's going to change though. He does pretty well into assassins as he's a naturally tanky champion and he is getting a little bit more damage, but will that be enough for him to actually be worth playing? If he was already really good into those types of assassins, wouldn't he be in a higher tier? But he just hasn't been performing like that, so it's hard to move him up at all. Now we finally made it to D tier, and you guys already know exactly who I'm going to talk about. And you know what, actually, I'm not even going to talk about it. I'm just going to show you this picture. That is all you need to know. That is the highlight champion for D tier. She's gone. If you happen to pick that thing in your games, just know that that is why Riot created the report button. But hopefully you take my advice and you don't pick it. Maybe you're looking for a different champion to play, or you feel like you're just missing something that isn't allowing you to win your games. You should absolutely go check out our website, GameLeap.com. We have tons and tons of guides, everything from the basics all the way down to the champion specific guides that get right into everything that you need to know about the best champions right now. Everything that we have up there is made by challenger level players, and we're always looking to make more and better content. content so that you guys can keep yourselves at your A game and winning. With mid lane wrapped up, let's jump up to the top lane. Now there's definitely been some shakeups around here, but one thing is definitely certain. And every time I think about it, it really just gives me a headache, because for some reason, Riot just can't get things right. Ornn is absolutely shattered right now. Trying to damage Ornn is like trying to damage a wall with your fist. There's a very clear winner there, and it's not your fist. He's got damage, percentage max health damage, slows, knockups, 2 of them actually, that's knockups plural. And on top of all that, he just gets better items than you, because he's cool, I guess. Sure, whatever. Ornn is free OP. But not all hope is lost, because there are a couple of champions who can hold their own against Ornn in the early game and even towards the later stages of the game where he starts becoming an absolutely ridiculous tank. In some way or another, they're able to either kill him or just ignore him entirely. It's impossible for an Ornn, no matter how big or tanky he is, to stop a Malphite from pressing R on your entire team. And champions who can swing back with true damage and percentage max health damage, much like Sett, can fare pretty well. And that's why Sett is actually our S tier highlight. Sett got some nerfs, and it brought him down from broken to S tier at the very least. He might even be a little bit worse than that, but we'll have to see. Stepping below that, you're looking at champions who are either able to bully lane really well, or they scale super well. Fiora, Camille, or even Nasus are champions that scale really hard, and once they hit that late game, are basically impossible to 1v1. Our highlight here is gonna go to Quinn. If you aren't facing somebody who's a super tank like Ornn, you're gonna have a really good time in lane with her, and if you can abuse your laner with that ranged top lane harass, then you're just gonna be able to snowball on them repeatedly over and over again. She's definitely a niche pick, but people should expect a little bit more from her, as underestimating her is exactly what gets you killed. Below that, moving into the B tier, you're looking at champions who might just not have quite enough to cut it, or they're insanely difficult. On top of that, a couple of them are really bad in the meta right now. B tier's highlight is gonna go to Gnar. A lot of people seem to be underestimating the little Yordle, and he has a lot of impact in teamfights and can actually snowball lanes if he gets ahead. It's just getting ahead can be the hard part. But if you have the mechanics to make up for it, Gnar's actually a pretty convincing pick. He's got percentage max health damage, tons of CC, and is actually quite tanky. Moving downwards into C tier, you'll notice that it's pretty small, and that's kind of odd because usually the lower you go, the more champions are there until you reach the very bottom. But that's because right now, these champions just lack the raw stats that they need to be able to contest people without something additional on top of that. In this case, we're going to be highlighting Olaf. Olaf is very good in the top lane, but he requires a lot of work that isn't necessarily related directly to your lane. He can pressure lanes really hard and does true damage, he's immune to CC, and well, why wouldn't he be good, right? The thing is that it's very easy to make mistakes with champions in this tier, and Olaf is no exception. If you throw a bad axe and start pushing your wave, you might overextend and get 2v1, and at that point there's nothing that you can do because you're not just strong enough right at the beginning of the game, or even when you hit level 6 to 2v1 right away. And as you might notice, Olaf doesn't really have an escape. Olaf's escape mechanism is killing his opponents. So it's a lot harder and you have less options overall. Now as we move into the D tier, you might notice that champion that we will not speak about is also there from the mid lane. We're not going to highlight her, we already did it once. She's basically out of the game. We're going to highlight Wukong. Wukong is a really strange champion because he can actually be really good in a couple different ways, but his problem is that there's everybody else in the game who's just infinitely better at what he wants to do than he is. And that just feels awful. The champion needs some buffs or some sort of rework in order to just be better. Like, a champion could build the same items as Wukong and do way more damage or be tankier. And it just sucks to see a champion like this get no love for so long. He's essentially just a glorified melee minion, and this joke has been made over and over again. Seriously, Riot needs to do something about him. The one thing, and the only thing that Wukong has going for him is that he actually scales insanely well. The problem is that you basically never get a chance to do that, but if you do hit 6 items, you are going to be a monster. Top lane's wrapped up, now let's move into the Bush Boys. We've got the junglers coming. Now we've had quite a few changes to some of the top tier junglers here. We're gonna see Sett and a couple others moving downwards, and Trundle is actually taking the only broken tier spot here. This doesn't really come as too much of a surprise. With champions like Sett, Nunu, Olaf, and Zac being pretty powerful, Trundle is a no-brain pick, and he doesn't do badly into assassins, like Elise. He's also got 2 different builds right now, between Conqueror and Predator, to try and fight against the specific team comps that he's up against. But then as we move downward into the S tier, we're gonna highlight Ivern. This guy seemingly came out of absolutely nowhere. And honestly, I was looking forward to him not existing as a good jungle pick for quite some time. But unfortunately, it seems like he's really favored in the meta right now, and when you think about it, it kind of makes sense. The jungle has seen some experience changes, and it's kind of close to what it was before, where you're not quite 3 levels down on the rest of your team, but it's not quite amazing either, and Ivern gets to ignore this, right? He gets to clear camps way faster and generally healthier than most other people. This can snowball to the point where he's even up in levels compared to his solo laners, which is absolutely ridiculous. And on top of that, his supportive nature will counter a lot of the assassins who are favored in the meta, specifically the mid lane ones. And not only that, but he'll do well against tanks in the jungle too, because the damage that they do have won't be enough to kill his team. Slipping down into A tier, let's take a look at Shyvana. AP Shyvana is actually really disgusting right now. Like, that's the only word for it. She does a ton of damage, she farms pretty quickly and relatively safely, and this is really compounded by the fact that Krugs got changed this patch. The amount of experience and gold that Krugs give got shifted towards the smaller ones, and she does exceptionally well at clearing them. Oh yeah, and you know, the whole elemental dragons thing, I mean, that's just amazing for Shyvana's passive. She gets a ton of free resistances. She's been looking better and better every patch, and I wouldn't expect her to go away anytime soon. Heading into B tier, we're gonna look at Pantheon. He's got some really good dueling potential in the early game against other junglers, and his E is very powerful for nullifying damage, but outside of his very early game and the mid game where he spikes mostly at 2 items, he feels a little bit strange to play in the jungle. He doesn't Omega Giga Turbo farm until he's able to 1v9 every single game, and he doesn't quite have the ganks of somebody like Elise. What puts him ahead of those in C and D tier is the usefulness of his ultimate. Being able to impact multiple areas of the map at once or in succession is very powerful, and that really keeps Pantheon one step ahead of the rest of the game. Moving down into C tier, let's talk about Sylas. After Sylas got changed, he got some compensation buffs because Riot felt that he was a little bit too weak. And he's in an okay spot right now in terms of laning, especially top lane where he's actually not bad. However, in the jungle, the buffs were just enough to the point where Sylas is actually viable in some situations. You're really only ever gonna pick him when you're looking at enemy teams who have very valuable ultimates to steal. If they don't have something like that, then just don't pick him. And then finally into the D tier, let's talk briefly about Qiyana. Back when she got the attack speed nerfs on her W, we thought it was going to be a really big deal, and turns out that it really was. Even if you're looking at the very top of the line players in Challenger, Grandmaster, and Master, she's still not performing as well as you might like. When you're looking at something like a 42% win rate, that is really not good. Alright, now that the jungle's been cleaned up and warded, let's move into bot lane. We're looking at AD carry first. Now sadly, the very broken tier has not changed since last patch, and that's pretty lame to see. Despite the nerfs to both Senna and Misfortune, they are heavily outperforming other AD carries right now, and that's not really going to change. The nerfs that they got don't really impact them at their strongest points, it's about making them weaker when they are actually weak, and that's not enough to justify them being picked less because supports can make up for this difference. The broken tier highlight is gonna be Senna. It's just ridiculous when she can auto attack you from like 1,000 range and crit you for half of your health. It's pretty absurd. Why does this champion still exist? And why does she still heal for like half her health bar? What is pretty cool though is that every other tier is pretty much seeing changes all around the board. Vayne is actually an S tier AD carry right now, and she's gonna be our S tier highlight. With all these meta shifts all around the lanes in terms of jungle and top, and even mid lane with the assassins, Vayne is actually pretty effective at dealing with a lot of them. Her stealth is invaluable against a lot of targets who don't have any form of true sight and usually won't buy sweepers. On top of that, she excels into the big tanks like Ornn or even Sett with her extensive true damage. Stepping into A tier, you might have also noticed that Ezreal has jumped up a couple tiers. The attack speed buff to him is actually quite significant and impacts him at all points of the game. And with us seeing a shift more towards AD builds, then the attack speed is even more impactful at that point. Moving on into B tier, we've actually moved Draven up here, and not because he necessarily got any buffs or changes, but because of the support changes and how they're impacting him. Draven doesn't do all that well into really heavy tanks who he can't do damage to in the early game, but because enchanter supports are becoming more common and they're getting more powerful in terms of how they can support him, Draven is actually doing pretty okay right now. Beyond that, stepping into C tier, you're looking at Heimerdinger, Kai'Sa, and Xayah, and specifically we're looking at Kai'Sa here. Really, Kai'Sa's not that bad, but what lands her in C tier is that she's so insanely difficult to play right now. There is a lot of lockdown and a lot of hidden healing and shields around all over the place. Not to mention that the early game is incredibly important right now, so Kai'Sa usually doesn't get a chance to scale and get those items to melt those tanks. Basically, she's going to require a lot more effort than you'd want to put in. And lastly, the D tier of the AD carries. Let's talk about Kalista briefly. Now honestly, the champion does a good amount of damage, but what really just makes her impossible to play is that every single champion in the bot lane seems to have a slow of some kind, or even worse than that, a stun. Kalista's attack speed is directly tied to her speed during her hop, and if she's slowed by 50% and it takes her 2 seconds to move 2 feet because for some reason she decided that she wanted to be fancy and jump everywhere, then you're just not gonna do any damage no matter what. If you can tell me how Kalista in any universe beats a Senna with Glacial Augment, by all means, let me know in the comments. Alright, now we finally got the supports, our last class of champions to talk about. Our broken tier highlight is Yuumi. She got a ton of buffs and changes in this patch, and she's gonna be really strong. Yes, technically the lane is still risky in the early game, but once you get to like level 6, you're gonna be hard pressed to find a tank who can actually kill somebody that Yuumi is defending, and even before then, with her bringing double defensive summoner spells, good luck with that. And once she starts scaling, getting ranks in her queue, doing percentage current health damage and more damage and healing more and being harder to catch, well, there you go. Moving down into S tier and away from that absolute abomination of a feline, we're going to be looking at Nami. Now Nami's been a bit strong for quite some time now, but she seems to be doing even better as every patch goes on. She's not quite broken tier, but she's actually really good. She's got some good damage, she's got good CC, she's got good healing, so she's actually like a blend of all 3 different types of supports, even though she's really just an enchanter. And she can also combo with AP champions really well ever since the change to her E. Moving into A tier, we're going to be highlighting Swain. Swain is a champion who is really associated with solo lanes. He's one of those scaling mages who takes some time to ramp up and that sort of thing, so what makes him good at support? Well, he's got a lot of catch power, and he's got a lot of damage. And you might be thinking, well, I guess he's kind of easy to kill then, right? Well, wrong. This dude is actually no joke to kill, especially when he hits that R button. He doubles the health from his passive, and all of a sudden he turns into a super tank. Especially if you're going the build that we mentioned in our recent Korean builds video, you are basically an unstoppable force. When you're playing against Swain, your only option is really to abuse him early game or hope you have champions that scale so incredibly well that they can just ignore Swain's damage over time and destroy his health bar. Moving into B tier, I want to highlight Rakan, because Rakan seems to be a champion who's kind of underestimated these days, but just because he's B tier doesn't mean he's bad tier. He's got pretty good engage, a ton of peel, a little bit of poke, some healing, so a pretty good amount of everything overall. The thing is, Rakan is weak to CC, and with CC being at an absolute premium right now with Nautilus, Leona, and other champions like that being really good, he kinda struggles because he's just gonna die before he can really move around the fight and dance around his enemies. Rakan's also really good at setting up a lot of wombo combos, so he has a ton of potential there too. Moving into C tier, let's talk about Vel'Koz support. Now this champion might seem a little lackluster at first, and it's really because he's so hard to play. Your Q is basically 2 skill shots in one, your W is also a skill shot, your E is a skill shot, and your R is like kinda a skill shot, I guess. So you can easily miss everything, and even if you land everything, it might not be enough. But once you get some items in the pocket, oh man, Vel'Koz can really tear up some people, especially if the enemy team is like trying to do Dragon or Baron, and you're over the wall, just launch everything you have into the pit and burn all their health bars. But again, the problem is that you gotta get to that point, and Vel'Koz really struggles there. And lastly, you might be noticing that our D tier support is all by himself. If you're thinking about picking Tahm Kench, do yourself a favor and think about somebody else. Because unless you're a professional level support player, Tahm Kench is just not gonna have that much of an impact. You are probably better off picking literally any other champion. And if you're unsure who to pick, then I highly recommend that you go check out our website, GameLeap.com. We have tons of champion guides up there to help you learn who you want to play and perfect them. And we've also got other kinds of guides on basic skills and lane-specific skills to help you play at your best. Everything that we have is made by challenger level players, and we're always looking to make more and better content so that you guys can play at your absolute A game. If you made it this far, thanks for watching the whole video. What do you guys think of the list? We made a couple of improvements and adjustments, and I hope it does better for you guys here. Anyways, as always, my name is Ace Windstorm, and I will see you all later.